March 22, 2. People always ask me what the scariest day of the war was. They expect me to talk about missiles, explosions, or air raid sirens. But that's not the memory that still keeps me awake. The one I remember started with a hospital. My name is Maxim. Back then I was 26, living in western Ukraine, working remotely as an IT technician. Like everyone else, my life had been turned upside down within a matter of days. Every conversation began with the same question: are you safe? Most of the time, nobody really knew the answer. On that particular morning, my cousin called me just after sunrise. Can you drive today? His voice sounded exhausted. Where? Lutsk Regional Hospital. I didn't even ask why. Fuel was already difficult to find. Public transport barely functioned. And anyone who still owned a working car, they became the family driver overnight. I'll be there in 20 minutes. The roads were strangely quiet. Not empty. Just different. Traffic lights still changed colors. Buses still stopped at stations, but everything moved slower. Every passing military vehicle made civilians pull closer to the side of the road. People no longer looked at each other, they looked at the sky. When I reached the hospital parking lot, I almost turned around. There were ambulances lined up all the way to the entrance. Volunteers weren't shouting. Doctors weren't running. Everyone moved with calm precision, and somehow that felt even heavier. My cousin Alexei climbed into the passenger seat carrying two backpacks and a cardboard box taped shut. His jacket smelled like disinfectant. Everything okay? I asked. He nodded. Yeah, mostly. That word had started carrying too much weight. He placed the box carefully between his feet. Don't hit any potholes. What's inside? Medical equipment. I looked over. Expensive. He smiled weakly. Let's just say someone will have a very bad day if we break it. We laughed. Not because it was funny, because laughing had become easier than thinking. Our destination was another hospital, nearly 3 hours away. Normally, the drive would have been simple. In March 2022, nothing was simple anymore. Every 30 or 40 kilometers, we reached another checkpoint. Concrete blocks. Sandbags. Steel. Anti-tank hedgehogs. Armed soldiers checking every vehicle. The first checkpoint took less than 2 minutes. The second took nearly 15. One soldier walked around my car twice before leaning toward the driver's window. Where are you heading? Alexei handed over several documents. Medical delivery. The soldier read them carefully before nodding. Drive safely. As we pulled away, neither of us spoke. The checkpoints weren't frightening. They were reminders that normal life had disappeared almost overnight. About an hour later, we stopped at a small gas station. Half the pumps were covered with plastic. Only diesel remained. The cashier apologized before we even asked. No gasoline today. Outside, an elderly man stood beside an old silver Leno staring at the price board. He wasn't filling his car. He was just standing there. After a minute, he quietly asked me, "Young man, do you know if the road toward Riven is still open?" "I think so." "You think?" "I drove through yesterday." He nodded without saying anything else. His wife was sitting inside the car wrapped in two blankets despite the warm afternoon. Neither of them looked scared, just tired. War changes faces in strange ways. People stop looking surprised. They simply become older. We continued north under a gray sky. The radio switched constantly between music and emergency announcements. Every few minutes another alert appeared for a different region. It became background noise. That's probably the strangest part of adapting. Things that once would have stopped your heart slowly become routine. Around 4 in the afternoon, my GPS suddenly froze. The screen stayed on one image before turning completely black. I tapped it. Nothing. "You've got to be kidding me," I muttered. Alexei pulled out his own phone. No signal. Mine showed one weak bar before losing that too. We had paper directions somewhere in the glove compartment, but they were already outdated because several roads had been closed since the invasion began. At the next intersection, there were no road signs. Someone had removed them. I remembered hearing why. To confuse enemy forces. At the time, it made perfect sense. Unfortunately, it also confused everyone else. I slowed the car. Left. Alexei shrugged. I honestly don't know. The road looked recently repaired. Fresh asphalt. No traffic. No houses. Just endless pine forests, stretching in both directions. For several minutes we didn't pass another Vehicle. No trucks. No buses. Nothing. The silence inside the car became uncomfortable. Finally, far ahead, we noticed a faded blue sign pointing toward what looked like a small district hospital. Neither of us had ever heard the town's name before. Still. A hospital usually meant people. People meant directions, and directions meant getting back on the correct road. I turned the steering wheel toward the narrow side road without realizing that this single decision would change the entire day. The road narrowed almost immediately. The fresh pavement disappeared after a few hundred meters, replaced by cracked concrete patch so many times it looked like a quilt. Pine trees crowded both sides, their branches hanging low enough to brush the roof of my car whenever the wind picked up. Still no signal. Alexei leaned closer to the windshield. This doesn't feel like the way to hospital. It doesn't, I admitted, but we've already come this far. Another minute passed before the trees finally opened into a small settlement. It wasn't abandoned. It was simply paused. Most windows were covered from the inside with blankets or wooden boards. Shop signs had been taken down. The only sound came from a diesel generator humming somewhere behind a grocery store. An old woman swept broken glass from the sidewalk as if it were any ordinary Tuesday. She didn't even look up when we drove past. At the center of the village stood a faded white building with a red cross painted above the entrance, the hospital, or at least what had once been one. Several ambulances were parked outside, covered in dried mud. A military pickup stood near the entrance, its windshield cracked. I parked beside a delivery van. We should ask for directions, Alexei said. The moment we stepped out, a nurse hurried toward us. You two aren't from here. It wasn't a question. No, I answered. We're trying to reach another hospital, but our GPS died. She glanced at the cardboard box. Medical equipment. Alexei nodded. Wrong hospital, we figured. She looked around before lowering her voice. The main highway ahead is closed. A bridge was damaged yesterday. If you keep driving north, you'll waste hours. So how do we get back? There's another road. She pointed behind the building. It cuts through 2 villages and joins the highway again. Is it safe? She hesitated. As safe as anything is right now. That wasn't exactly reassuring. Before we could thank her, the hospital doors burst open. Orderlies rushed outside pushing a stretcher. The patient was completely covered with a gray blanket. Nobody spoke. Nobody cried. Everyone simply kept moving. I noticed Alexei staring at the ground. You okay? He nodded without meeting my eyes. My first week here. He stopped. I thought I'd get used to scenes like this. And you don't. Neither of us said another word as we climbed back into the car. The road behind the hospital was even narrower. Branches scraped both mirrors. Every few kilometers another handmade checkpoint appeared. Tractor tires, concrete blocks, metal barriers welded together. From old railway tracks, some were guarded by soldiers, others by local territorial defense volunteers carrying hunting rifles and wearing mismatched camouflage. One checkpoint stopped us longer than the others. A young soldier, couldn't have been older than 19. He studied our documents carefully before looking inside the car. Open the trunk, please. I did. Sleeping bags, a toolbox, to spare fuel cans. Nothing unusual. He nodded but didn't wave us through immediately. Instead, he asked quietly, you didn't happen to drive through Cleven today? No. Good. He looked relieved. There were reports of saboteurs using civilian vehicles. Alexei and I exchanged a quick glance. Rumors like that spread everywhere during those first months. Sometimes they were true, sometimes they weren't. Either way, nobody ignored them. As we continued driving, the forest slowly gave way to open fields. Burned grass stretched toward the horizon. Abandoned farm equipment stood exactly where workers had left it weeks earlier. It felt like someone had pressed pause on an entire country. About 40 minutes later, we reached a crossroads. No signs. Just for empty roads. Great, I sighed. Alexei unfolded the paper map across his knees. This should be the intersection. He frowned. Double quotes. Actually. What? I don't think this road even exists on here. I laughed quietly. Of course it didn't. Nothing matched the maps anymore. Just then, an old white minibus approached from the opposite direction. I flashed my headlights. The driver slowed. A man in his 50s leaned out the window. You boys lost. Looks that way, he smiled. Happens every day now. I explained where we were trying to go. He thought for a moment. before pointing east. Take that road for about 15 kilometers. You'll pass a church with a blue roof. Turn right after it. You sure? I've driven it 3 times this week. Thank you. He started pulling away before stopping again. Oh, and don't stop if someone waves you down in the forest. I looked at him. What do you mean? He shrugged. Could be someone needing help. A pause. Could be someone who isn't. Then he drove away. For several seconds neither Alexei nor I spoke. Finally he broke the silence. You think he was serious? I kept my eyes on the road ahead. I think everyone's serious these days. The late afternoon sun began slipping lower behind the trees. For the first time all day, I felt a quiet pressure in my chest. Not fear exactly. Just the growing realization that darkness was coming. And we were still a long way from where we were supposed to be. By the time the sun disappeared behind the tree line, the entire landscape had changed. The fields gave way to dense forest once again, and the road became little more than a narrow strip of uneven asphalt cutting through the darkness. I turned on the high beams. They barely helped. Mist had started forming above the ground, catching the headlights and making every shadow seem alive for just a second longer than it should have. The dashboard clock read 7:18 p.m. Normally, at that time of year, people would still be walking outside. Now the villages were almost completely empty. Curtains were drawn. Street lights remained off to avoid attracting attention during possible air raids. Only an occasional candle flickered behind a window. It felt as if the whole country had agreed to whisper, "You hungry?" Alexei asked, trying to break the silence. A little. He reached into his backpack and handed me a small package of biscuits. Emergency dinner. I laughed. Luxury? We shared the biscuits without saying much. Food had become practical. Nobody cared whether it tasted good anymore. A few kilometers later, we finally spotted the church the man had mentioned. Blue roof, white walls, exactly where he said it would be. Guess he was right. I turned onto the smaller road. Almost immediately, the pavement disappeared. Gravel crunched beneath the tires. Branches brushed both sides of the car. This can't be right, I muttered. It has to connect somewhere. Another 10 minutes passed. Still no houses. No traffic. No signs. Then dash lights. Not headlights. Flashlights. 3 bright beams appeared ahead, sweeping across the road. I instinctively slowed. A voice shouted from the darkness, "Stop the vehicle." Before I could react, several figures stepped into the road. Rifles. Body armor. Blue armbands. Territorial defense. I rolled the window down slowly. One of the men approached. Cautiously. Documents. His tone wasn't aggressive, just tired. I handed over my driver's license while Alexei passed him the medical transport papers. The man looked through everything carefully. "Where are you coming from?" "Lutsk." "And where are you going?" I named the hospital. He frowned. "You're nowhere near the correct road." "So, we've been told." Another volunteer walked around the vehicle, checking the license plates with a flashlight. Everything felt routine. Professional. Still, my pulse refused to slow down. Finally, the first man handed back the documents. "You made a wrong turn about 20 kilometers ago. I was afraid of that." He nodded toward the trees behind. "US, you don't want to keep going this way." "Why?" He looked over his shoulder before answering. "Last night someone abandoned 2 civilian vehicles farther ahead. Accident." "We don't know." That answer hung in the air. Alexei shifted uncomfortably in his seat. The volunteer noticed. "Don't worry." He gave a tired smile. "You're fine now." He unfolded a paper map from his pocket and pointed to a narrow secondary road. "If you go back 5 kilometers and turn west, you'll reconnect with the regional highway. No more shortcuts." "Understood." As I started the engine again, he tapped lightly on the window. "Drive together if you see another vehicle." "Why?" He shrugged. "It's just better." Those words stayed with me. Not because they sounded frightening, because he spoke as though they were completely ordinary. We turned around and headed back. For nearly 15 minutes, the only sound was the gravel beneath the tires. Then, in the distance, another pair of headlights appeared. An old white van. It caught up quickly before settling a few car lengths behind us. "Looks like we've got company," Alexei said. I checked the mirror. They're keeping their distance. For the next 20 minutes, we drove almost like a convoy. Whenever I slowed for a pothole, they slowed too. Whenever I accelerated, they followed. It was oddly comforting. Finally, we reached the paved road again. The van flashed its headlights twice before turning in another direction. I raised my hand in thanks, even though they probably couldn't see it. You know, Alexei said quietly. 6 months ago, that would have been weird. What? Feeling safer because a complete stranger was driving behind us. He wasn't wrong. The war had changed the meaning of small things. A stranger offering directions. A soldier wishing you a safe trip. Someone sharing the road with you after sunset. Those gestures suddenly carried far more weight than they ever had before. Around 8:40 p.m., mobile signal finally returned. Both our phones vibrated almost at the same time. Dozens of missed calls, messages from family. Air raid alerts that had already expired. I immediately called my mother. She answered before the first ring had even finished. Maxim, I'm okay. Where have you been? No signal. I've been calling for 3 hours. I'm sorry. There was a long silence before she finally said, just come home safely. I will. After hanging up, neither of us spoke. Sometimes the shortest conversations stay with you the longest. The navigation loaded again. This time it showed the correct route, 48 more kilometers. For the first time all day, it felt like we might actually make it. Neither of us knew that the hardest part of the journey in getting lost. It was what we'd find when we finally reached the hospital. The navigation estimated another 45 minutes. For the first time since leaving Lutz that morning, I relaxed my grip on the steering wheel. The road widened, fresh lane markings appeared. Every few kilometers, we passed military trucks heading in the opposite direction. Their headlights dimmed under blackout regulations. None of them slowed, but every driver lifted two fingers from the wheel in a quiet greeting. It had become an unspoken language. No smiles. No unnecessary words, just a simple acknowledgement that everyone was trying to get somewhere safely. The closer we got to the city, the more ambulances we saw. One, then another, then three traveling together. Their sirens stayed silent. Only the blue lights reflected off the wet pavement. They're all heading back, Alexei said quietly. I nodded. Neither of us wanted to guess why. About 30 minutes later, the hospital finally came into view. It was much larger than I expected. Several buildings spread across a wide campus surrounded by temporary fencing and rows of sandbags. The windows on the lower floors had been covered with plywood. Generators hummed behind the emergency entrance. Despite the late hour, the parking lot was nearly full. Doctors, nurses, military vehicles, civilian cars. It looked more like a small city than a hospital. A security guard approached before we even stepped out. Medical delivery. Alexei held up the paperwork. The guard pointed toward Building C. They've been waiting. Two orderlies met us at the entrance with a rolling cart. The moment they saw the cardboard box, one of them smiled for the first time all day. Thank God, you've been expecting this, I asked. Since yesterday. The younger orderly carefully lifted the box onto the cart as though it contained glass. In a way, he said, it does. Within seconds they disappeared, through the automatic doors. Just like that. 3 hours of driving. Wrong. Turns. Checkpoints. Forest roads. And the package was gone. I expected to feel relieved. Instead, I just felt. Empty. Alexei stretched his back. I need 5 minutes. For what? Coffee. I don't think coffee exists anymore. He laughed. It has too. Inside the main lobby, the hospital was surprisingly quiet. Not silent. Quiet. People spoke softly. Phones vibrated instead of ringing. Even footsteps seemed careful. A small kiosk near the entrance was still open. The menu had only 4 items. Coffee. Tea. Water. Plain sandwiches. We bought 2 paper cups and sat on a wooden bench, facing a large window. Outside, another ambulance arrived. Nobody rushed. The rear doors opened. Medical staff wheeled a patient inside. Within 30 seconds, the ambulance was already leaving again. Everything moved with practiced efficiency. They've done this hundreds of times, I said. Alexei stared into his coffee. Thousands. A doctor walked past carrying a stack of patient files taller than his forearm. He looked exhausted. Dark circles under his eyes, unshaven. Still moving, still working. Near the reception desk, a little girl, maybe 7 years old, sat, coloring in a notebook while her grandmother slept beside her. The child carefully shaded a picture of a sunflower, bright yellow, perfectly, inside the lines. For a moment, it was the most peaceful thing I'd seen in weeks. Then, the hospital lights flickered. Just once. The generators kicked in almost instantly. Nobody reacted. Nobody even looked up. That told me everything. They were used to it. As we finished our coffee, one of the orderlies returned. You to delivered the monitor. Alexei nodded. Double quotes. It arrived just in time. What was wrong with the old one? He smiled tiredly. There wasn't an old one. Neither of us knew how to answer that. Before leaving, he extended his hand. Thank you for making the trip. I shook it. It wasn't that difficult. He looked at me for a long second. No, his voice stayed calm, but it mattered. Those words stayed in my head as we walked back toward the parking lot. The air outside felt colder now. The city was almost completely dark under blackout rules. Only the hospital windows gave off a faint glow. I unlocked the car before climbing inside. I looked back one last time. People were still arriving. Doctors were still working. Ambulances were still coming and going. The war hadn't paused just because our drive was over. On the way home, Alexei eventually fell asleep in the passenger seat. For the first hour I drove without turning on the radio. I just listened to the sound of the engine and watched the empty highway stretch ahead. That morning, I thought I was simply giving someone a ride. Instead, I learned something I hadn't understood. During the first weeks of the invasion. Not every important story begins with explosions. Sometimes, it begins with a wrong turn. A paper map. A cardboard box. And a hospital waiting for something that couldn't afford to arrive late. I've driven that route several times since then. The roads are different now. Some checkpoints are gone. The signs have returned. Phone service works almost everywhere. But every time I pass that small district hospital hidden among the pine trees, I slow down for just a moment, because whenever people ask me what I remember most about 2022, it isn't fear. It isn't the empty highways. It isn't even getting lost. It's the quiet determination I saw in every doctor, every soldier, every driver, and every stranger who pointed us in the right direction when none of the maps could. Sometimes surviving a difficult time isn't about doing something extraordinary. Sometimes it's simply making sure you keep moving forward until someone else can take the next step.